good morning. Boker is morning. Tov is good. Okay. What?
Baltimore, two.
All right. Number 10 is chumash or chumish. That comes from the word. The root of that is chamesh, 5. So it's the 5 books of Moses, the chumash or the chumish. That's number 10. Okay. Number 11. Sounds like you kind of have something stuck in your throat. Chumrah. Want to say that together? Chumrah. All right. Or a chumrah. It sounds the same. It's a stringency in Jewish law. So I was debating whether to put this on the list or not because this isn't relevant in most communities. But it's a word that's used often in like our synagogue. Oh, that's a chumrah. That's a stringency. Don't take on so many chumras. Don't take on so many stringencies. So, good thing to know. Number 14 is what you all have, a Gemara. Okay, Gemara is the Aramaic word for Talmud, and Talmud is the Hebrew word for the oral tradition. And the oral, I'm going to keep going. We're going to learn that today. Okay, but this is one of the books of Gemara. Gemara in Aramaic means to learn or to teach, and this is a collection of oral traditions written down in the Gemara in the Talmud. We're going to go over some of that history, so you'll have the dates and who put it together. Okay. Number 24, kol kavod that you all came here today. Number 24, all of the respect. Kol is all, hakavod is respect. All of the respect. People say, good job, kol kavod. Number 25 is the opposite of chumrah. It's a kula. Okay, so someone's taking on a lot of leniencies in Jewish law. You're doing a lot of kulas. You're piling on the kulas over there. Okay, so that's.
When you're doing wrong, right?
Not necessarily wrong. Sometimes people will want to go by a more lenient view. It's within the framework of Jewish law. Sometimes if someone does too many of them, then you start thinking, you shouldn't take on all the easy views. But that's the word kulas from the root kal, which is easy or light. Mm-hmm. Okay, kuf lamed. On the second page, okay, Laila Tov. Laila is night, Tov is good. Have a good night. Okay. Number 37 is Pasuk. Pasuk means verse. It's a verse. When you read the Torah, you're reading Psukim, verses of the Torah, Pasuk, verse. And number 39 is something that Jews are pretty good at, schmoozing. Okay, chatting, making small talk. Okay, schmooze. It's from Yiddish. It's from the root of schmooze. Okay.
How come shmying isn't on here?
What, shma?
Shmying, which is used to shop.
Oh, because I didn't know it until just now. I don't have. It's not very complicated for me to shop. It's black and white. I have a few colored sweaters, but they're usually gray, blue, or black. Okay. You don't need to know anything more than that. All right, so we're starting here. Judaism for Beginners, Class 7, Introduction to Jewish Law. There's so much to do in this class, but if we keep a steady pace, there's some fun. There's a game at the end. Okay, yeah. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk a little about this is about the history. This breaks into 2 parts: history of Jewish law and the practical law and custom. So history we're going to talk about oral tradition versus the written tradition, and we're going to see that there are 5 key stages to the evolution of Jewish law. Now there are many stages. I try to break it down into 5. If you know that, I think you will be able to be in a dialogue with people who know about Jewish law. You'll know that's the backbone of Jewish law. So if you know those 5 stages, you'll be in good shape. And we'll talk about them. The practical law and custom, I'm just going to talk about 2 of them. Meat and milk and kippah. Meat and milk, we're going to see that's a biblical law. A kippah is the other spectrum. It's a custom. And there's a lot going on in between, too. So we're going to talk about that, those different ones, and kind of discuss, just like, why can't you mix meat and milk? I just chose them, just like as an example. I could have chosen a lot of different things. Why we don't eat meat and milk together, and what's the story behind the kippah? And there's a lot of really interesting things to say about different kippahs that people wear. Okay, there are maybe 50 50 different types of kippahs, and they all signify different things. Okay? If you can tell somebody, you can tell what somebody's ideology is, oftentimes in Israel at least, by which kippah they choose. And not just by which kippah they choose, by which size the kippah is. Okay? So you have people who are knitted kippahs, if they just kind of grew up religious and they're not really into it, and they're like, so that might have like this really small one on the side or something. But when they go to yeshiva, they'll get a bigger one. It'll be knit if they're in. So we'll talk about that. Like, what are the different kippahs and what they mean, and why do we wear it? Why does one wear a kippah? And then lastly, the game is biblical or rabbinic. This is like a rabbi game, okay? This is like this is what keeps us interested, okay? Biblical, rabbinic, or custom. So I'm going to give you 2 topics, candles and Passover, and just ask you to try to think about which one, after we introduce these 3 different categories, which aspects you think are biblical or rabbinic or custom. So that's what it's going to be the structure. All right. Okay. So this is. Okay. So this is like a really important thing. When I finally understood this, when I came to yeshiva, when I first understood, I was listening to a recording. I heard this piece here that I'm going to teach you, and this was really helpful for me. So we have a written and oral tradition. It's like an important thing to know. In Jewish law, there's a written and there's oral tradition, and this principle was something that was in place for a long time. Okay. Things that are written, you are not allowed to verbalize. Things that are transmitted verbally, you are not allowed to write down. So what does that mean? Let's do the first part. This is how Jewish communities related to the laws. They say like this: if you have something written down, anytime you quote it, you have to read it inside. It could be because we don't want to make mistakes or whatever. So some people actually still do this today in like religious communities. Whenever they're reading from the Bible in their sermon or something, they'll read it from inside, just to maintain this idea of like always seeing something inside. So there was the written Torah, like the 24 books of Moses, 24 books of the Tanakh that we talked about. Whenever you read it, you shouldn't do it by memory. You should read it inside. There was a principle. The more important part is the second part. Things that are transmitted verbally, you're not allowed to write down. Okay, so if you went back to that time period where this was being practiced, you wouldn't have any of these books. This book is the Gemara. This is a recording of the oral traditions. But it was forbidden to write down the oral tradition for many reasons. Number one, it's very hard to transmit messages in writing. It's like ever have somebody you're in touch with over the email and you think they're saying one thing, but it's something completely different. It's just you're reading it a certain way, but when you talk to them in person, like, what are you talking about? I didn't mean that at all. So sometimes when you write something down, you lose some of what the original intent is. And so what really happened for years was that we had oral traditions, and they've developed also through time, and every teacher would just teach their student verbally. And you'd have your rebbe and your rabbi, and you learn that way. And that's how the tradition, it ensured that the children would continue the tradition of the parents, and also ensured that the traditions would remain intact. And there was so those are 2 reasons. A third reason, which is the explanation to this picture, is that some of the examples that, if you write down the examples, let's say 2,000 years ago, of really big principles, you record it, it gets stuck in place forever. And so if you open up one of the books of the Talmud, when you first get when you're in yeshiva and seminary, you read about gores oxing, oxes goring people or property, and the idea is like if your property damages someone else's property, who's liable? That's really the principle. But the examples they're using seem to be outdated to us. It talks about oxes. So if someone were to write down the oral tradition today, a Gemara today, this probably would be, so your Corvette drove into my this, and our property is, my property damaged your property. And so really there's an issue of like writing something down and concretizing it, in that you end up using outdated examples. And then when someone approaches it in the modern day, they think that it's not relevant for them. So the main work of like halachis today, people who are trying to decipher Jewish law, they go back to those old examples of the oxes and the goring, and they try to extrapolate from there, from the principles that are there, to our modern day. So you have electricity. What do you do with electricity on the Sabbath? That wasn't around in the Talmud. So if things were just passed on from generation to generation, we'd have those principles and we apply them in every generation. But now we have to go back to the example and try to understand what the principle was behind the example. So that's kind of like, those are some of the reasons why this was in play for a long time. This idea that you can't write things down that are transmitted orally. Only what could be a danger with that approach, though? What? Interpretation, yeah.
Or over the years, it becomes a game of telephone, and everyone changes just a little bit, and
Yeah.
no one gets the same.
Or forgetfulness, right? So that's what led to this being changed. Okay, so that's what this. I wanted to give this is going to be this is potential to be a handout, but I didn't perfect the language here. So this is this is the main slide you should know. I think it's worthwhile to know this slide. This is a good one because these are really the 5 building blocks of the evolution of Jewish law, and this transition from Bible to Mishnah. That's what happened when the traditions started to get forgotten. People started to forget what the traditions were, or started to get transmitted in a faulty way. A rabbi stood up, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, in 200 CE and said, enough of this. There's faulty traditions out there. We're forgetting things. We can't uphold that principle that we were upholding for so long. You can't write things down. And he decided to write down the oral traditions on the laws of the 5 books of Moses. That was like a big shift in how we study. Because before that, you weren't really studying from books. You're studying verbally. And there's something very powerful in that. We try to do that actually on Passover too. We sit together and you share ideas, but it ends up that we're reading from the Haggadah and everybody reads their little part or whatever. But really, that's what we're trying to reenact. So that was what happened with the Mishnah. I just want to show you. Any questions on that?
But when you think that also happened too, because you're looking at that's a time right after the destruction of the Second Temple. So Romans are pretty much trying to disperse and destroy the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
So if a lot of those oral traditions weren't going to be written down, they would have been lost.
Yes, exactly. So there was the fear of them being lost also, for sure. And so he took it upon himself. So what he did, he kind of went around to the different rabbis. He said, hey, do you guys have do you have traditions that you receive from your rabbis? And some of them wrote down things to themselves, they had in their own pads. You were allowed to do that, but you weren't really allowed to write them down and have them. You're take notes or whatever, but you weren't allowed to have books and stuff like that. So he went around and he collected sayings from rabbis from before his time. And if anybody ever heard of chapters of the fathers, Pirkei Avot? So anybody heard of "If I'm not for myself, who will be for me"? Okay, so that's those are statements of. This is a popular book. It's called Chapters of the Fathers. It's 6 chapters where it talks about all these ethical directives. So it's all these famous statements that you might hear, like Hillel said, "If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If not now, when?" If you ever heard that, that's part of the Mishnah. Those are traditions that rabbis was going around in the community, and he ended up writing it down. So I just want to kind of show you what a book of Mishnah might look like. Oh, sorry. Okay, this is actually a nice thing too. All right, let's go in order actually. Let me take a step back, okay? There are 5 levels here. We're going to we're going to keep going back to this slide. Let's talk about the first level, the Bible. The Bible, this is the first stage. The Bible there's 613 mitzvot, commandments. There's a tradition like that, okay? Now, we don't know what they are. We don't have a list of them. The Talmud just says there are 613 mitzvot stated to Moses in the Torah. So if you ever count the 10 commandments, you actually just go through the 10 commandments, you go through the whole text, you might find 14 commandments in there. There's a lot of don't do this, don't do that. There's 4 other ones that people kind of gloss over. And so it's very hard to count. I'm just giving you an example. It's very hard to count how many mitzvot there are. How do you do it? So we have this tradition that there's 613 mitzvot. And that's a well-known thing. And different rabbis try to figure out what those 613 are. And so Maimonides did. He wrote a book. A few other rabbis did. So we have a few accounts of what they are. Some of them are more accepted than others. But I just want to, like there isn't this idea of 613 mitzvot, and 365 prohibitions corresponding to the number of days in the solar year, and 248 positive corresponding to the number of a person's limbs. Any doctors here know if there's 240? There's also like this. Anybody ever hear like some people say we eat a pomegranate on Rosh Hashanah because it has 613 seeds? I once counted. I only found 612. No, I was joking. I didn't count. But the idea is like anyway. The idea is you're supposed to have as many mitzvot that are filled with mitzvot like a pomegranate. Anyway, another approach which is interesting. The word Torah's numerical value is 611, and then you have 2 commandments which Jews heard on Sinai that equals 613. So the numerical value in Hebrew, the Taf is 400, the Vav is 6, the Resh is 200, and the Hey is 5. That's 400 plus Vav is 6. It equals 611, okay? So these are just 2 explanations for it. But really, there is this tradition, there's 613 commandments. Anybody familiar with this song? Echad mi yodeya, echad. Please say yes, I don't have to sing it. All right, you're familiar with it? So, who knows one? This is from Passover. We sing this if you make it till the end of the Seder, if you don't leave before that. This is what people sing. And this is a kind of like an account of all these numbers in Judaism. So one of them is Shi, Shas, Yidrei, Mishnah, Cham, Yishachum, Shetorah, Arba, Imaha. So 6 are the books of the Mishnah. Okay, that's ones that that's referenced there. And these are, it's what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi put together. So I just want to show you like an example of what Mishnahs look like. Okay. Now I'm not teaching this. I'm just showing you like what these collections of oral traditions that he had. He put them together. Here's an example. And I took this from the tractate of Brachot, which talks about blessings. I'll just read here. If one has before him many species, Rabbi Yehuda says, if there is among them one of the 7 species, bless on that one. But the sages say, bless on whichever he desires. These are like debates that went on amongst the rabbis, and somebody recorded it finally. Otherwise, this would have they had to remember it. They had to tell their children all these things. So another example. If one blessed on the fruits of the tree, who created the fruit of the ground, it's a blessing. He fulfilled his obligation. If he blessed the fruits of the ground, who created the fruit of the tree, he did not fulfill his obligation. In all cases, if he said, for everything exists by God's word, he fulfilled his obligation. So I'm just showing you, this is just an account of different traditions that were kept going, that were shared in different academies. And he kind of went around and collected them. So that's just like a taste for what like Mishnahs look like. Okay. Any questions on that or? Okay. So what happens now? You have the Mishnahs. They're written down. Now the same fear creeps up again because we are later, a few hundred years later, we're trying to understand what the Mishnahs were saying. We're losing the traditions. So what do? You have rabbis trying to figure out what the Mishnah is saying. Okay? So what do? They have discussions. They have debates. It goes back and forth, in and out, all around. And in the end, we have all these new traditions explain the Mishnah. But we're afraid that they're going to get lost. So what do? Write down compile another book. What's that book? That's the book you have in front of you. That's one of the books you have in front of you. That's the Talmud. Okay, the Talmud was compiled later on, and it was compiled a few hundred years also afterwards, or like later redactors who added things and whatever. But Ravina Rav Ashi, they recorded discussions and debates of the rabbis on the laws delineated in the Mishnah. It also includes some really good stories too. So the Gemara, the Talmud, is what is studied in yeshivas all over. Like this is what I studied. These books is what I studied for like years, all day. And this is what people study. I know. Sounds pretty fun.
So which is older, the Jerusalem?
What?
Which is older? Which Talmud? The Jerusalem.
The Jerusalem Talmud is older. Is older than the Babylon. There are 2 Talmuds. There's one written in Jerusalem, one that was recorded in Babylonia. But I only brought. I'm only talking about the Babylonian Talmud because that's what you have in front of you. In a moment, we'll look at it and just try to see the layers. Now, this can be a powerful moment. If you're comfortable sharing, who here? Let me see. I'll say a lot of people haven't never opened up. There's a teacher in the high school here, and he teaches kids. He teaches Hebrew. He's from Israel. And one day, I met him in the library. I was like, "You want to learn something?" We're good friends. Like we connect a lot. So he's like, "Yeah, so let's learn something." And so I was like, "Do you know what these books are?" He's like, "No, I don't know what they are." It was the first time he grew up in Israel. He grew up in kind of religious communities. He never opened up a book of Talmud before, and so it was a very powerful moment for him to open it up and understand what was going on there. Because this is just a book that's been studied for years upon years upon years, and this is what everybody studies in the seminaries. So hopefully you will get the opportunity to open it up and kind of just to see what's going on inside. So we'll do that in a moment. Okay, so that's the Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud is anybody here a very linear thinker? What is it? Linear thinker? Thinks in a linear way? 1, 2, 3, things organized. Yeah? So the Babylonian Talmud is the reverse of that. It's the opposite of that. So it's very tangential. You'll start on one topic, but that's what makes you start on one topic, you end up on a whole other topic. You're like, what the heck just happened? You end up I remember spending a full week in yeshiva and thinking what did I just do this whole week? I start on this topic, I'm on another topic, and it's kind of but there's something really beautiful to the Talmud in the sense it's recordings of live discussions. Live discussions aren't always we wake up in all the laws and then wake up in the morning and Shabbat and Yom. Life's not like that. Life is very you multitask in life and you go off in different tangents and you have discussions. And so when you read the Talmud, it's you're involved in a live discussion with rabbis from for over 100 years. Doesn't that sound great? No. But, so that's kind of in terms of how the Talmud's structured. I think I had something on the Talmud here. Oh, so I just wanted to show you what it might look like people studying Talmud, and then we'll open up the Talmud. Okay, so here are 3 depictions of different groups studying Talmud. Okay, this is a very ultra Orthodox seminary. This is Haredi, and these people. This is how they're spending their day. They're studying the Talmud. Usually, you study in part with a partner, because when you study with a partner, you're involved. It's the discussion's continuing among you also. It's called a chavruta. That's another one to put on there. Chavruta is from the root chaver, is friend. Mm-hmm. So you're supposed to learn with a friend, so the Torah is alive. So you'll see a little bit of that here. Another thing is it's very loud. Yeah, I remember getting to yeshiva, and I was used to studying when you're in the library, shh. This librarian, she shushes everybody, So I tried to do that when I first got. It didn't work. So it's very loud, but once you get in your zone, you just add to the noise, and it's actually become something beautiful. Some people call it the voice of Torah, the Kol Torah.
Friday morning, Shishi, Parshas Va'era, 4:15 a.m.
That's one small clip. I don't know where this is from. I'm just trying to show you kind of what might look like on the inside. Now this is a clip from the yeshiva at which I studied. This is we'll see they're wearing different kippahs in this one. They're wearing knitted kippahs. So this is a different group. This is people who are more, and we'll talk about that when we get to the kippah part. But this is more of a modern group.
From intuition.
Okay.
Take a look at this young man with the white jacket and the red and blue shirt.
So these actually are
young gentleman next to him.
These are actually high
They're
school
talking
students.
about a text. Take a look down there.
I used to sit over there.
So as this gentleman passes, right at the edge, you've got
So this is
two
like
young men,
a
one
big
in the
study
dark
hall.
blue
You got bigger ones than
sweater, and the next one with a dark red crimson shirt. They're
He's
looking
probably
over
looking up like another source
a,
in the
text.
Talmud, which like
Look over
referred
there,
to.
you've
He's
got
going
one gentleman
he got up
standing
to
up
go look it up.
animatedly discussing with somebody else the text. All of the people in this
On
room
his cell phone.
are poring over and discussing
All the people, except for these
the
two.
same text. I can't see from here which text it is, but chances are it is from
What?
a volume of the Babylonian Talmud, or one or a few of the commentaries.
Okay, so that was actually, I learned it in that yeshiva for 2 years at seminary, and there's actually a cycle of how you learn the Talmud. There are like 7 main tractates that you learn over your years in seminary, and you kind of get through them. So the idea is you're supposed to the Talmud is anybody who, like, if you really want to understand Jewish law, these are the traditions that all Jewish law today stems from. So that's why people are studying, trying to know what it says.
So, but there are no, like you said, it's very tangential.
Yes.
So if you want to go back and refresh yourself, or if somebody comes to you with a, controversy or something.
Wonderful.
Do you know where to go? Because I'm sure there's many books.
Yes.
Right.
So that's why the later books are written down. That
Okay.
try to put everything in order.
Okay.
So that was we're at the 3rd stage. There are
Okay.
2 more stages.
Okay.
No. You're totally asking the right question.
Okay.
There are books that were put on later on that aren't tangential. They're encyclopedic,
Okay.
based on topics. They're topical.
Okay.
So those are the books we reference, and those books often reference us back to the Talmud. You always want to get back to the Talmud to see what the source of things
Right.
is. So I just want to show you. This is much more. This is Orthodox, like a very more modern, more progressive Orthodox group where men and women are learning together in the Beit Midrash. And this is in New York. It's called a Machon Hadar. And here is Rabbani Bracha when she's getting her, getting her smicha. She's conferred. Getting her title as a rabbi. This is the ceremony. I just found this online. So women are. This is the group that she graduated with. So these are a group of women, and they actually study in their own seminary without men, just women. And they study Talmud also, and other texts. So that's kind of like just a little bit on the Talmud, where you study Talmud. And for a long time, women didn't study Talmud. But it's picking up even in Orthodox circles in the last 100 years. That now, if lots of women don't want to do it, or some communities don't want women to do it. But modern Orthodox communities, people who are like more in the modern world, they women study in those circles Talmud. So Torah studies opened up a lot for women over the last 100 years in Orthodoxy. It's almost in a lot of circles. It's just like simple, like men and women, they're learning the same things. But some communities, in more ultra-Orthodox communities, it's not like that. Let's open up a Talmud, a page of Talmud. Okay, everybody. So you all have different book. We don't have the same book. Okay, all of these most of them are different. Okay, I had them all lined up here beforehand, just to show you kind of what it might look like. There's 60. I think there are 63 tractates. I believe so, and each one's on a different topic. The next stage, that was stage 3. The next stage, Maimonides said, "Oh gosh, these people, these rabbis, they're so complicated. These discussions, they're so long-winded. You can go crazy by these long-winded discussions, tangential." He said, "I gotta help people out. I am going to write a book. It's going to be organized into 14 sections. And in these 14 sections, I'm going to talk about every single topic that the Talmud discusses, And anybody who wants to find it, they can just look it up, the topic based on these broad 14 books that have subtopics. They'll be able to find everything they need. He started with the laws of what you need to know about Judaism. Then he went into prayer. Then he went into laws of repentance and all these laws laws of Sabbath, holidays. He took all the pieces from the Talmud, he put them all together into almost like an encyclopedia. And that's a central book in Jewish law called the Mishnah Torah. Okay, and that was put down around this time
Why it's
period.
14?
14. That's how the number of main topics that he arrived at. And I brought that down just because it's called Yad HaChazakah, the strong hand, because Yud Dalet in Hebrew is 14. So Yad is Yud Dalet. Anyway, but this is an important text to know. Maimonides wrote down this encyclopedic work. Okay, so now we think we're set, right? We have everything organized now. Maimonides set things in place for us. We're good. Only problem is, he wasn't the only one who was writing in his time period. There were other rabbis who were writing. Okay, so this is where this last stage came into play. This is the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, if you're in any communities, traditional communities, this is the authoritative book in terms of Jewish law today. Now, of course, there are many commentaries that are put out on this book. Okay, it's always like that. But this book was accepted very widely in a lot of communities, and there are laws for people from Middle Eastern countries, Sephardim and Ashkenazim, like European countries. And this was put down in 1563. It's a compilation of laws in topical order based on commentaries of rabbis, included but not limited to Maimonides and the Talmud. So he came after Maimonides a few hundred years later. He said, Oy vey, I have Maimonides' view, but I have the Rif's view, I have the Rosh's view, I have all these big rabbis' views. What do we do? He says, I'm going to take them all, I'm going to take them all into account and put down a final law based on all their approaches. And that's what he did. And that's the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch literally means a set table. He tried to set the table for us. And that's kind of, if you ever, even like the conservative movement and reform movement, if they're doing halachic process, they will refer to the Shulchan Aruch. They might say, we don't agree with it. But the discussions kind of like start, that's like the central and authoritative book in Jewish law. And so there are a lot of stuff written on it afterwards. But it kind of starts, the order's different than Maimonides' book too, but that's like for another time. So I just kind of wanted you to see, that's the structure. And the main idea is like, every generation we're trying to make things easier and record, but it kind of ends up being complicated because you have a lot more to study. But that's kind of like the structure, yeah.
So in your schooling in yeshiva, why do you do the Talmud instead of one of the more?
Because somebody who just knows Shulchan Aruch, it's like somebody who, it's like knowing Wikipedia, right? So you can read Wikipedia and people think you're an expert on anything. But if you've gone to college, you have a degree in a topic, you can write the entry in Wikipedia and you could say a lot more. So it's like you need expertise and the background to all the laws. You don't. The Shulchan Aruch is just like the bottom line. But if you just understand Shulchan Aruch, you don't know anything that's going on behind the scenes. You don't know how we arrived at that. You also don't know in the Shulchan Aruch there are different levels of laws. Some are more important. Some are less important. You won't know that if you didn't read all the other texts.
So where did they use? Who uses that?
Who uses that? So community.
You didn't use it in Shabbat.
So communities who abide by Jewish law or in whatever format, they're abiding by what appears in the Shulchan Aruch for the most part. So like on the Sabbath, do you light certain things, or on lighting candles on Friday night? So that appears in the Shulchan Aruch. Going to services, that appears in the Shulchan Aruch. Waking up in the morning, making blessings over food, like we mentioned, that appears in the Shulchan Aruch. All these laws appear there in their order, and communities live based on that for the most part. But it's really an extension of all these other stages.
But the same stuff was in Talmud also.
A lot of some of that was new, and he incorporated interpretations of these rabbis in this period on the Talmud. So that's kind of like.
So then my question is, but nothing since 1563.
You don't want me to bring all this stuff that was there. Okay, I don't have room for that. Seriously. But these, I was careful to say key.
Okay.
Because there was a
I
lot of
got it.
stuff going on in this time period too.
Sure.
Okay, these are the
But
five.
there's got to be stuff since 1563. Tons of it.
There's a lot of it.
There's stuff since 5.
But the truth is, it still goes back to the Shulchan Aruch. Most of it's
Okay.
commentary on the Shulchan Aruch.
Okay.
And there are books that come out, like these Jewish law books in English, but they always reference you to the Shulchan Aruch.
I got it.
So it's and there's also responsa that's been put out, which is a person will come to a rabbi and ask them a question, and the rabbi will have to and it's a question that wasn't dealt with in the Shulchan Aruch, like electricity, or I don't know, or kidney transplants, or some other type of topic that are topics that wasn't discussed there. A rabbi will delve into these different books and try to come out with an answer, and that's called responsa. That's a whole different. I could have brought that too, actually. That's a sixth, but these are the five main ones. All right. Let's play a game, huh? Okay, it's been a little bit heavy. Let's play a game. All right. So let me just explain what we're doing in the game. There are three types of practical law. Okay, so I know I have a lot of lists for you today. I like lists. And by the end of this course, you either will really like it or really hate it. All right, but I like lists, and this is basically summing up what we talked about. There's biblical laws, there's rabbinic laws, which is laws that appear in the Mishnah or the Talmud, and later authorities explain them. Then you have customs. Okay, so whenever you are approaching a law, you want to think about, what is it? Is this a biblical law? Is this a rabbinical law? Or is it a custom? And why do you want to do that? Rabbinic law is binding, at least in traditional Judaism, like Orthodox Judaism, rabbinic law. They believe that the rabbis were given, like the Torah gives them the authority to decipher law. But sometimes if you have a choice to do a biblical or rabbinic one, you're going to do the biblical one. Okay? Or if you have some sort of doubt, oftentimes we might be more lenient on a rabbinic law, but stricter on a biblical law. So I'll just give you an example, like eating leavened bread on Passover. That's a biblical law, and it's a serious one. So people are really careful. They clean their whole houses. They go crazy because it's a biblical law. But there are other things that are customs, which some communities did, some communities didn't do, and there were necessarily rabbis. It didn't necessarily come from the rabbis. It came from organically from within the community. And so customs sometimes are also binding, but some of them depends on the community. And so you need to know really when you're going through and you're discussing different laws, like to know which category it falls into. And so our historical discussion beforehand is relevant in the sense that the Mishnah and the Talmud laws are considered rabbinic laws, and rabbis came up with laws in order to safeguard sometimes the biblical laws, so people wouldn't go off the path, or they came up with certain enactments they thought would be beneficial for the community. I'll give you an example. Should I give you that now? That's going to Purim. Purim is not a Torah law. It's not a biblical law. It's a rabbinical law. Okay, that's why people drive on Purim, at least in Orthodox communities, or in all communities. But because it's not a biblical law, it's a rabbinic law. And so that's just an example. We're going to see a few more here, but a custom. Kippah is a custom. The Talmud mentions the kippah, but it says that this one rabbi never would walk 6 feet without his head covered. That's what it says in the Talmud. Now, it doesn't say you must wear a yarmulke on your head. It doesn't say that. It just said a rabbi used to do that. But through the generations, people pick this up for different reasons. It's almost become like something that Jewish men do, and different communities Jewish women also do. And it's become like a very serious thing. Yeah, or it's like you have some sort of doubt. If you have some sort of doubt in relation to a law, you might be more lenient when it comes to a rabbinic one. So if somebody's on the Sabbath, they need to desecrate the Sabbath for some reason. We like maybe for some sort of health reason that's not life endangering. So we might tell them it's better to break a rabbinic one than a biblical one if you can find a way to do that. So that's like an example. Okay, so here's the game. All right, let's do this. Okay, if you have a pen and a paper, try to guess which is biblical, which is rabbinic, and which is a custom. Okay. Now, no one's going to know if you got it right or not, and it's okay if you don't get it right. But just try to let's try to do this exercise. This is just to kind of get used to thinking this way. All right. So the answers are, I don't have the answers on this, but I'll tell you what they are. Shabbat candles are, somebody want to?
Biblical?
Custom.
Custom, rabbinic,
Rabbinic.
rabbinic. We have all three options. So the answer is rabbinic. Okay. So the rabbis instituted that we should light Shabbos candles. Why? Because they said when you come in your home and it's dark, that's not the way to celebrate Shabbos. You have to have Shabbos candles. It lights up your home, and adds a certain aura to the home. So I added the aura part because today we have electricity. So it adds some sort of some sort of ambiance. Yeah, exactly. Ambiance. That's a good word. All right. Chanukiah. If you're comfortable sharing what you thought that would be. We light on Hanukkah.
Rabbinic.
Rabbinic, custom,
Rabbinic.
rabbinic, biblical.
Based on what you
It's
said.
not
No,
biblical.
why not biblical?
Because Hanukkah's not a biblical holiday.
Why
It's
not?
not a major holiday.
It's only in the
Because
middle.
it's a history holiday. It's,
So Hanukkah happened after the Bible was written.
yeah, so it can't
Okay.
be biblical.
So it's not a biblical law. It's a rabbinic law. Okay.
Rabbinic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The rabbis instituted Hanukkah, instituted the Chanukiah, that we should light it to remember the miracles. So there's things that rabbis institute that have really made it their way into our Jewish lives, that have improved them. Rabbis try to institute different things that would help us remember different events and celebrate them in a positive way. All right, memorial candle.
Biblical.
Custom. So it's a custom, yeah. You can light it, you cannot light it. Different people light one for a long time. Some people light them for a short time. I don't know. There's different customs related to that. I've received several questions on this actually in synagogue on the menorah candle. Maybe more than I received on these candles. Whatever. So it's a custom. People like. I have a video on that. I can link to that. It's like why we light the memorial candle. But it's just it's a custom. But one of the reasons is that you want to. We talked about that I think in our class. Okay, so let's move on. Laws of Yom Tov. Yom Tov holiday candles on the holidays like Sukkot or Rosh Hashanah. Or Yom Kippur.
It's a customer.
Rabbinic.
So it's also rabbinic, okay? So this is kind of like they're very similar. It's also rabbinic. The rabbis instituted we should light candles around the holidays also. So the Teva menorah, I guess you can guess from process of elimination or have to have some sort of biblical representation here. It's biblical, okay? The Bible talks about the menorah that you light in the temple, and that's a biblical law. So here we have all kinds of different candles that are lit in different time periods for different occasions in different locations, and they all stem from different levels of obligation. So this would be the most serious one, which would be the biblical one, and then it will go down in that respect. But the rabbinical laws are extremely important in traditional communities. Like we have the traditional communities uphold them in the most serious way. The only time where we might grade them would be like if you have to choose between them, or you might have some sort of doubt, you'd be more lenient in one of them, you'd be lenient in the rabbinic one. There are some ramifications, but they're practiced almost equally. But it's just good to know the distinction and like when they started and how they generated. All right, here's one more. Okay, Passover. If you're comfortable, if you're able to write it down, that's good. All right. So I brought this just because a lot of people are familiar with these mitzvot, these things that we do at the Seder Pesach. So I wanted to bring an example that people are familiar with. Hopefully, some of us are. So matzah. What would you say, matzah? Biblical, rabbinic, custom?
Rabbinic.
Okay, rabbinic. Any
Biblical.
biblical, custom? Anybody? Yeah. So the Torah says you're supposed to eat matzahs. Okay, if you open up the Torah, there's a few verses that talk about that. So it's a biblical thing. That's why people are very careful in how much they eat. They start to eat a certain amount. And you can find some people eating a lot of different times, different amounts to make sure that they fulfill the requirement of being very constipated the next day. No, of the biblical. Okay, so maror, bitter herbs. So this is a tricky one. I'm just going to give it away. It's written in the Torah, but today it's rabbinic, and I'll explain why in a moment. Okay, so that's a complicated. So if you wrote biblical or rabbinic, you're right. So that was a good one, an easier one. Passover sacrifice. Biblical, yeah. So that's written in the Torah.
But how does it change from, like, how does the herbs, how does it change to
rabbinic?
rabbinical?
So that,
when God tells them they're supposed to
yeah,
eat their
so it says you're supposed to eat the Passover sacrifice with
bitter.
matzahs and bitter herbs. When you don't have the Passover sacrifice, biblically you don't have to eat bitter herbs. The rabbis instituted we should eat it anyway to remember what we did in the temple period. Now, matzahs are written separately. There's a separate verse that says you should have to eat matzahs, not connected to the Passover sacrifice. So it's still considered a biblical obligation. Legumes. So there's a law that you don't just eat. There's something that people do that says you don't just eat. You can't just eat. You can't just stay away from unleavened bread. You have to stay away from things that are similar to that, or beans that might have had mixed in with them, wheat kernels. So you have to be careful of that. That's why Ashkenazim in traditional communities, the conservative movement just changed their law like this last year or two. But they won't eat like hummus or chickpeas or beans on Passover because they're afraid that the grains of the wheat grains might have got mixed up in the barrels of the other grains. And so people say today they wouldn't have barrels, things still get mixed up, that it's not really of a concern. But still, a lot of Orthodoxy hasn't moved on that. Conservative and Reform have. But a lot of conservative people in the conservative movement still uphold that they won't eat beans or rice or legumes on Passover for that concern. So what do you think that is?
Don't they also ferment too?
Custom.
Don't they also ferment like barley and hops and stuff? It's the same thing like in beer.
Yeah, well, barley is also considered.
But with them fermenting, I know like they throw like yeast and stuff in with beer, same kind of thing that it creates carbon dioxide.
So barley is considered one of the grains that are
rabbinic.
So what do you think? Rabbinic, custom, biblical?
Custom.
Rabbinic.
So it actually is a custom. There was no rabbis got up. The communities took it upon themselves to do this, and it became like ingrained in the community. And it's like a serious. Actually, it's one of the markers between Orthodoxy and conservative movement. There are a few of them. Like the partition in the sanctuary is one of them, and this is another one. Last thing, 4 cups of wine. Yes, that is a rabbinic law. The rabbis instituted we should have 4 cups of wine so we could celebrate the 4 types of liberation that we went through in Egypt. So I just want to kind of show you. We didn't get to this last part, which I wanted to do, but we didn't get to meat and milk and kippahs. Maybe we'll touch on that next class, maybe. But I just wanted to kind of just like do a really quick synopsis, like in a minute, of what we did. This is what we did today. These are like the 5 different stages, the evolution of halakha, and the whole idea was like things kept getting forgotten, so they wrote down more. Things kept expanding. We had to summarize and condense it. Now that's the process of Jewish law. This period's Torah law, this is rabbinic law, and over the generation, these are just commentaries on the rabbinic law. Okay? Generations later on developed different customs, and so there are a lot of sources to different laws. There are a lot of different reasons, and the whole purpose of the study in like seminaries and classes and stuff like that is try to unpeel the different layers and to get further back and try to see the sources behind what we're doing. And so that's kind of like I wanted to just give you like the general framework. This is just an entryway into the study of Jewish law and the text connected to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good.